And that's because they look down instead of looking up. Because if they looked up, they'd see they ain't nowhere near the middle. And I used to tell people that sometimes it's your boss that decides tomorrow you go to the welfare department and hope that they have a check for you. In this country, we don't mind spending $200 million to send food to the moon that we know nobody's there. But have a poor woman go to ask for $500 to feed their kids and everybody gets upset. What kind of a society are we? I don't understand it. I really don't. And it'd be one thing if we were a poor nation, but we are so wealthy that it just upsets me that we don't care about each other and we don't care about people's basic human needs. And I'm going to tell you something. One of the articles that I'm in the process of writing is about how they're trying to make the word public obsolete. That's dangerous. In Detroit, they privatized the water. And so if people can't pay their water bill, their water gets shut off. That becomes a health issue. Because if my kid can't get clean and can't wash and gets sick and goes to school, even if you could pay your water bill, what's to stop your kid from catching that disease? Nothing. Okay? So we need to be able to relate to one another, and we need to watch out for these corporations. I'm telling you, they think because they have all this money that they can buy everything that there is, and they're pushing poor people out of the cities, and that's why I love DSNI. Okay? I love DSNI. They want to know why I'm there every day, because that's how grateful I am to them. Because all my friends are moving out to the suburbs. I have never wanted to live in the suburbs. I am a city girl, okay? I love living right there, and whenever I want all the resources are within 2 miles, you know? I don't want to live 40 miles that way and have to commute every single day back and forth to the city. The resources that people in poverty need are in the city. So for them to push poor people out of the city, it's something for everybody to be concerned about, okay? And it's not that poor people are welcomed in the suburbs, I want you to know, okay? So we need to think, and that's what I think is the problem, that people do not think, you know? And they don't seem to care about anybody but themselves. But we have to think of ourselves as neighbors, and we have to think of ourselves as a community, which is part 2 of why I love DSNI. I mean, when I got my house, and honestly, I didn't know what I was doing when I bought my house. I won this lottery, the only lottery I ever entered. They were building 10 houses. I was looking for a 3-bedroom apartment. I couldn't find it because I was taking care of my mother and my daughter. And I wanted my daughter to have her own room. I mean, she was a teenager, and she and I had been sharing a bedroom all her life. And I couldn't find a 3-bedroom apartment to save my soul. So somehow, I don't even remember how now, I heard that DSNI was building 10 houses, 3-bedroom. And I still could see my daughter saying, "Mommy, what does that mean?" I said, "I'm going to apply. And in a few weeks, we'll get a letter saying you got number 3,268. But a few weeks later, I got a letter saying I got number 10. My daughter said, "Mommy, what does that mean?" I said, "That means we ain't moving till they build it." And at the time, I was living in Mattapan. But since I worked at UMass, and it was in this neighborhood, because if somebody had told me 10 years before that I would live in this neighborhood, I'd have laughed at them. But they were building brand new houses, no lead, no asbestos, brand new. So when, and it was closer to my job. So I said, "Hey, I'm gonna go for it." And I feel like a rich woman, honestly, and as somebody that has been on welfare, to watch people build your house. I even got to know the guys building the house and tell them, oh, I want that over there. GS and I said, we're gonna have wall-to-wall carpeting. I said, I don't want wall-to-wall carpeting, I want hardwood floors. and I could work with DS and I, you know, that's the thing, you can talk to them because they listen to you, you know, and I like that. And I like the fact that as a community activist, that my house and this neighborhood is kept up by community activists. And I just urge everybody, we have to be community activists. It's our community or else it ain't gonna be ours, right? Okay? So we have to be active, and we have to know what's going on, and we have to look at things and think, what does this mean? What's it gonna do to us? What are the possibilities? And it's been 17 years since they built those 10 houses, and out of those 10 families, only one has moved. That makes a community. We all know not only each other, but each other's families and friends, and we can watch out for each other. And that's when you feel like, you know, this is a community. I know where I am. I know who's around me. And I think that's why DS&I is one of the most, honestly, one of the best things that have ever happened in this neighborhood. Woo! And I say to Chinatown, you know, do it. We're trying to do it. No, seriously, if anybody down there thinks that it's not the thing to do,
no, I think everybody knows it's a thing to do, but how to meet the challenge of, you know, like, most of the people who own the row houses are not rich people either. Right. So they want to pass, you know, like, how this, particularly from like old Chinese, no immigrant family. So this is my life saving or my family saving. We want to be able to pass it down to our children. So they see those dollar signs, right? So if they just Google and they look at it, they go, oh, down the street, somebody, they're offering $1 million. I can take $1 million and give it to my children. I said, wait a minute. So I really appreciate you raising that question about the word public. We don't, as a society, we need to go back to really go deep into what does public mean. Because everything that we did, from education to everything, the word public is gone. As the privatization and everything. So really appreciate you raising that.
Public is associated with negative things.
I think
Public is being associated with negative things.
Right.
Poor services, poor whatever.
So we need to bring back,
Right.
we need to bring back a deep discussion about our public good.
Right.
All of us have common, you know, so those things that are for, there are certain things that need to be public control or public.
And I think it also means that we need to really look at who's sending these messages.
Right.
And start combating that as well. Why is public represented as something that's connected? Who or what entities are responsible for that?
So we heard some of the struggles, but can you talk about how they have been impacted the situation today? So 30, 40 years later?
What is the difference?
I've heard this right.
All the struggles that we've been talking about, that we went through all these things, how they have been impacted the situation today?
How they have an impact on the situation today?
Yeah.
Well, Diane can't sell her house for a great big profit because we established a land trust and we put all of those, structures around it. But I can sell my house for a fortune because I have a great big mansion. And that I bought for $6,000 in 1971 that nobody wanted anything here. So now, what am I supposed to do?
Put it on land trust.
Anybody that's old, who owns something that's not on the land trust, which therefore doesn't have that prevention in it, we got a problem, you've got the
Yeah.
problem, we've got
Yeah.
the problem, even though we're here. You know,
This
if
is
I
tax
sell a top dollar, I'll have a retirement nest egg. If I sell at a fair price to the land trust, so that the land trust can work, it's coming out of my well-being
That's
and
the
my
question,
eye.
right.
I
That
mean,
is-
that's wrong, right? It's wrong that it's that way, but that is the way it is, and we don't have the answer to that.
Well, that's exactly what we're facing now.
That's exactly what you're doing.
Because one of the, in fact, she was on the board of the land trust. Now she has removed herself because she's selling her home. She's selling her, she said, I think we can sell it for 1.3 million. I said, are you kidding me? What is small? I mean, you're talking about one bedroom each floor, it has 3 floors, but still. I said, well, the land trust can't put up that kind of money. And then she turned around and looked at me, and she said, but it's not, it's the government's role to subsidize housing,
No.
but not, no, wait, this is what she said. She said, but you cannot ask me to subsidize the future.
But who is the government?
So
Well, yeah,
this
I mean,
notion,
this exists, and we don't
I know.
answer that. What was I gonna say? So there needs to be some kind of intervention that has to come from a collective place, like government or, you know, something like that, because otherwise the market will just go and do what it does, and market forces will drive our decisions, and we haven't solved that problem. We know what we want because the land trust, yes, and I did something, but we didn't get enough resources or power to affect the whole thing.
so I think what you were talking about historically, some of the struggles, what lessons we learned and where we are today.
Yeah.
Every single thing that I know that we have won from the city ordinance for jobs
Right.
to Chinatown winning back the last parcel of large public land for use for the community. It was a result of organizing. And then a lot of those, you know, she mentioned the third world workers. I was part of that. We went over to the lobby and but we don't do enough, like cross-community, citywide, because it's not just one community's issue. So what I'm seeing now, that we cannot just continue fighting in our individual community like that. We need a bigger movement that is a, you know, to
Yeah.
put that, right? So secondly, but in individual community, we need to have strong grassroots base building community, organization, so that can anchor this kind of fight. We cannot be roaming around going from fight to fight without having that structure in place. And unfortunately, what I see the difference between 30 and 40 years ago, some of us were young then. We can go at it. Yeah. So now, with I know that a lot of young folks are interested in doing this work, but the question is too, so can I make a living and do this? Because I was a teacher, and I ran CPA for 20 years, that's my volunteer work. And later, when I became principal, I didn't have the time to do it, so that's why, luckily, we were training people to take over, but we need to be able to train faster and go deeper, so that we have continuous, so because talking about building a movement is not one or two people. You need to have that continuous development of folks that will take up and build, and not go backward, but build, continue to build. And that's what I see we are at. But we have some solid foundation, but we really need to sink our teeth into building it, and not starting moving up and down.
Yeah, let me have a similar, story to Bob's in terms of where I was in '68 and where the housing situation was and where we as a people are now. I bought a house in 1969 for $7,000. It's in an area called Fort Hill.
Oh.
You can sell that for $2 million.
Well, see, it's interesting. there's a house that was built similar to the one I own, 2 houses down on a lot. And they're selling each of the condominiums, 2 condominiums, they're trying to sell for $450,000. The reality is that increase in value in my house, taxes I'm paying maybe about $300,000 in terms of the tax. The value of the house is around $300,000 in terms of taxes. The reality is that increase in value wasn't contributed by me fixing it up. That increase in value came because of work that people in the neighborhood did with the city to make it a neighborhood that people felt comfortable coming to. And yet the only people who get value from that public work, from the public investment, because there's been public investment because of the organizing, the pressure, the only people who get value are the people who own the house. The only people who get the value are the people who own the house. And that's theft. From my perspective, when you think about it from the standpoint of public policy, that's theft. The question is, what do we do? One thing I think we need to do is we need to have job policies that say that the jobs that are here in Boston have to be shared with Boston workers. Not just construction jobs, but all jobs, so that we begin to say that the income that's coming out of the land, our land, if we're residents of the city and that makes us citizens, then it's our land. And the Fidelities and all the corporations that are here are on our land. And how do they share with us? They share with us around, in many ways, but the jobs are another part of it. On any public land, if you don't have a land trust, we shouldn't be having land built in our communities that are private developments. That is cooperative, that any multiple dwelling building needs to be cooperatively owned. That is, aren't we past the day when we'll say even organizations, even a CDC, why should a CDC own this housing? Why shouldn't the people in the housing own it? And so I think we need a movement in the city that gets the CDCs to say, we are in fact going to follow a DS&I kind of model where our work is going to be to develop cooperatively owned housing so that everybody who is there has a share. The third thing, and for me, perhaps the most important thing, given the fact that I've spent 50 years doing this stuff and maybe have a day left or a few years left, but really at the end of the cycle. And what's important is that what became dreadfully clear as a counselor, it was clear before, but as a counselor, there are people that I was representing who had no possibility of having a human quality of life. I was in jail. I spent almost 3 years in a federal prison. I used to say to the men that I was with, if I went out in the street, I could recruit men to come in here and take my place. I can recruit men to come. Why? Because I'm getting meals every day, there's air conditioning, I do a little bit of work, but there are people that I represented who don't have a job, who don't have skills that fit into the economy that is here, that if they have a job, they can't produce enough job money to in fact get an apartment. Because the apartment in my community costs $1,400 a month. And so I said, I was a council person representing people that I knew couldn't, were doomed. We're really doomed to a life of, some, of emotional and mental torment, because there was no, if you don't have any place where you know you can stay when you get up in the morning, you don't have any income coming in. As a human being, you are, you can't live a life where you are you're developing your own creative potential, because the material circumstance creates a psychological prison around you that is devastating. And in a free market economy, DS&I, the work DS&I is doing is tremendously important, and others in the city and elsewhere are also moving in that way, and that's very important. But the reality is, I look at Roxbury, is that the work we're doing on these models is not going to deal with the needs of a significant sector of our population, many of whom are young. If we have 40% unemployment and underemployment among our young people, then the reality is that we're looking at a group of young people who are going to grow old in a poverty situation throughout. What's the answer? See, my feeling is that we have to look at homesteading. We have to begin to we have to work both on getting policies in the city that make it possible for more and more of us to be able to hold on to a base in the city. But we also have to acknowledge that there's so many of us who are caught in this economic situation where we don't have those resources, that we as the organizers can't just throw up our hand and say there's nothing that can be done about this, or isn't it too bad that we can only deal with these people? That's insane. We're human beings. We have the ability to create with each other new realities. I think we need to move to homesteading. The government owns 1/3 of the land in this country. The government owns 1/3 of the land in the country. Why homesteading, in fact, was responsible for settling the West. That is, you could get 150 acres. After the Homesteading Act was passed in 1862, you could get 150 acres if you agreed to farm the land for 5 years. And you got 150 acres. That's the way the West, the Midwest and the West was settled. I think we need to start a movement that doesn't focus on the individual family, but focuses on communities. 400 or 500 people coming together with a plan for how they organize their the food, the production of food, the production of products that they can sell, this kind of education that they can
Well,
provide.
let's raise it for the PRA's new urban renewal plan.
Let me just finish. What I'm trying to get to is that one of the things that happens is we forget the underclass. There is an underclass in this city and other cities that aren't touched by our activism, that are so far away from the economic mainstream that our activism, it doesn't mean anything to them. And so my question for us is, how do we deal with the realities of the city, but also begin to acknowledge this underclass that the city isn't able to deal with, rather than just throw up our hands and say, we can't do anything about them because that's just too big a problem.
So with these thoughts, provocative thoughts, we're going to open up the floor for you guys to ask questions, since we only have like about 25 minutes, right? So I know that Stefania has been raising her hand for like half an hour for somebody
Oh,
else.
it's me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Work email. No, I just wanted to go back to the discussion. Hi, Counselor, because it's really kind of sort of for you, but to follow up, I'm sorry, Bob, to what Bob said about the letters that are being generated. My dad and my family live, and my father has owned this home probably since, the $7,000 cost in Dorchester. But that letter, which somebody foolishly gave to me, a copy of this letter, not, I just want to emphasize, it doesn't only say that they will purchase your home. They will purchase your home within 24 hours. They
Right.
will have someone come to do the assessment of the home. They will allow you up to 3 weeks to sort of find another place to live. And this letter my dad has gotten, but there are people physically knocking on doors of longtime homeowners because they believe these people are elderly. And then the last point I want to make, which is for you, Counselor, as it relates to development in the city, a question that I have for elected leadership is, you know, with eminent domain and all these different things of the past that really forced cultural communities out of their homes and communities and neighborhoods, what responsibility does our elected leadership has as it relates to the targeting of people who might end up like, oh yeah, that is a pretty friendly looking letter because it is handwritten, you know, like can.
I got a second one. Say,
Well-
why didn't you answer my first one?
Right, no, they are going, and so from what I've learned and what I hear is that it's gone to thousands of homes, not in just one neighborhood, but across the entire city.
That's right.
And it could very well be that in Chinatown or what other neighborhoods that people are selling their homes for, you know, huge amounts. That is a direct result of this homeowners, and they identify themselves as home buyers.
If the question is, what can elected officials do to stop those kinds of letters from circulating?
Sort of, or at least acknowledging the fact that people have been receiving them, and to call in to question these home buyers. I don't know, what can be done is from a elected seat.
You know, the answer is, I don't think, that there are actions that can be taken by elected officials around policies, around what's defined as affordable housing in our housing mix. What percentage of units does the developer have to focus on low and moderate income families? I mean, so there are actions that a council can take if they can rise above the politics, you know, that are out there to say, no, don't do it. You owe it to us, the owners of property, to be on our side. But see, the real dilemma is that we live from my perspective, the dilemma is that we live in a society where people have been raised to look at housing as a way that they can move forward. They can move forward. There are arguments that black people who are respected in this community have had about DS&I and the DS&I model. And why do they say, why do they have arguments? Because they say, just at the point where we are at a position where we can get some ownership, people come along and say we can't get full value for the ownership. Why do we have to limit the amount of money? And you say, well, don't you want to create a broader community? And the response is essentially, what about me? So the dilemma, I think, the way the dilemma can be dealt with outside of public officials is in the community. That is, in people, homeowners and people who aren't homeowners, talking to each other about community values and how do we begin to pull together? Are there ways that can we persuade homeowners to sign covenants that they won't sell above a certain price, or encourage them to sell people in the neighborhoods who, you know, that is, I don't think we should look to the elected officials at that on the issue of how the market works. We have to look to ourselves and see if we can begin to have dialogues, those of us who own houses and are getting older, whether we can begin to have people who sit down with us and talk about, well, how much do you really need to pass on? How much do you really need to pass on?
Can I just say, I just want to interject a couple of things in this conversation for a couple of reasons. I'm loving where you're going with this because there definitely needs to be conversations, okay? My daughter, my oldest daughter, she bought a house in the neighborhood about a year and a half ago. And she bought it from someone who is very embracive of the DSI concept and did not sell it to her for an absorbent amount of money. Because he said, I want to stay in the neighborhood with our people, you know, so he sold it to her at a very good rate. So those kind of conversations can really happen and can be effective. But I also wanted to point out, and I hope I can say this right, because I'm good with my foot right now. When do we get to the discussion that the capitalist structure and the way the real estate market is structured is wrong? That's right. When do we get and yes, of course, people think they're being gypped by not having being able to sell something at a certain amount of money because they've been taught and trained that the only way to make progress is to follow this model. When do we look at the model and say the model's not right? When do we change the economic structure of this country? Because it affects more than just housing. I just got finished reading a book, and ironically, it's about Baltimore, and it's called Not in My Neighborhood. And in the first 4 pages, and in the first 4 pages, it said, Baltimore, the city of Baltimore had the first law separating, stating that white people can't live with black people, and black people can't live with white people. It said that Baltimore set the model and the example for how to keep housing segregated, and the other cities followed it. I mean, it says more, and it goes on. It talks about the eugenics movement. Remember eugenics? About how that was a part of the rationale and the structure that was used to say that it was okay to do this. So we're just skimming the top of this issue. We have a whole industry that is modeled on separation and divide. And if you think about how this country was started, this land was taken from indigenous people. And in fact, my indigenous people were taken from that land and brought to this land that was taken from an indigenous people. So we have indigenous people being taken and brought to a land that was taken from indigenous people. That's whack. Okay.
Well,
Anyway, I'm sorry.
I'd just like to respond to you quickly also. Through my entire 45 years of being involved in this stuff in this neighborhood, there's always been some gimmick, there's always been some scam going on where they figured out how to rip the people off. Generally, the poor people, the people of color, and so on and so forth, wound up in these houses. And this one that we're talking about now is no exception in the whole thing. But we formed nonprofits, and sort of how I got into this in the first place is we formed nonprofits, and they were called Neighborhood Housing Services. And their purpose was to provide a whole array of resources to people in neighborhoods like this so that you would know when the scammers were coming around, and you would know who they were, and you would know not to fall for that, and there would be people kind of checking on you. Now, that doesn't answer the problem, it doesn't really solve the problem, but for the immediate, for the kind of, you know, what's happening right now situation, we do need that kind of thing. We do need people who have the wherewithal to kind of organize and inform and teach people not to fall for scam that's coming down, because after this one that we're talking about now, there'll be another new one. I mean, a lot of it has to do with lending. A lot of it has to do with people that would go to your door and knock on your door and say, sign here and we'll give you cash. We'll loan you cash on your house, which all meant that they were going to take the house in the end. So you have to be sharp, and there have to be people who are ahead of the game.
And you know, we have to remember that that concept of survival of the fittest, that was also created during the imperialist time period to justify having power over others.
So this is not just a U.S. problem.
Yes.
This is a global problem. You know, you have nations and countries now divided like that, right? The have-tos and have-nots, and everything is winning. So we can talk about all those big issues and I'm not sure, but at the same time, that we have to find solutions in human, because that picture of changing the system, to me, is a little long-term. it is long-term. You need a whole lot of people
Yeah.
to change that, right?
But we have to have it out there and take a step to go there.
So, but we need to do our work in the context of how do we fix, or at least make people's lives a little better.
Yes, we do, but also I like to bring that up to challenge people, because people think the only way to fix something is the same cycle going around and around and around. And still you're dizzy and you don't know why.
So we have one more question here.
Could it be something that is in Lower Roxbury, South End is newer folks came in and bought up buildings, and unfortunately they are white. Changed the street sign to say South End. Could there be something where, because particularly in that neighborhood, a lot of people move every year, every other year, they're not only are they getting letters, but their neighbors who own multiple properties are knocking on their doors, offering them more money every year. And generally, they're over the age of, 60-something, have retired, or have their families have lived there for generations. Could there be something on a policy level where the mayor takes a very strong position? Obviously, we touched on the whole idea of gentrification very lightly, occasionally on public television. But to really address it in a way that strongly says that it would be legal to, it's like they're victims. Some are well-balanced individuals, and they want to retire and they want to go live someplace in the suburbs, to have a certain kind of life, and that's fine. But I feel like there needs to be some kind of strong stance that our city councilors and the mayor can take and say that this is something that cannot happen, and even a way to report it. And the other thing I just want to, it's kind of a question: is that possible, or do you see that happening? But also, how can we really? These same people, one thing that's making that money look more and more attractive is that while the neighborhoods are becoming more gentrified, those people are not neighbors. Like, they don't talk to them. They walk down the streets, they come out their door, they don't say hi. And here they've lived in a community that used to be a whole community where everything several miles down the road was about who you were and who you knew, the kids and stuff. And so I know that's organizing and building community relationships, but it's such a problem everywhere you go. And I just want to know kind of what and I just real quick, from a personal note, we moved in Lower Roxbury. The first Black woman who rented us at a good price, she owned 2 buildings. She lost her building in foreclosure. We had to move. Within a year after that, we finally got another place, stayed there, helped renovate all the gardens that made people's property values go up, while the city neglected and other people neglected the open space there. But then our landlord, also Black, sold his building. He said, I will never move until you guys get your own home. He sold the building, and not even at a good rate. For that neighborhood, 1.5, 1.4. When you think about future value. So then we moved, which I love the beautiful Dorchester neighborhood that we live in. This beautiful lady, she's about to sell her building. We haven't even been there a little over a year. So our life has, for us to figure out how to be stable in life, we can't afford where we used to live. But they say, okay, go to shelters, go through the system. How we have to give up a quality of life for ourselves in order to afford to live. And we also are committed to our community. We give, So it's a thing that
I want to say
affects a lot
another
of
quick
people.
soundbite response to that. Rent control. Accelerated, right? I mean, rent control was not perfect, and rent control didn't save everybody, but it did do something to hold the values of some of the houses down and make it so some people could stay in the neighborhoods, and now we have nothing.
And it's be illegal to plow on older folks, There has to be something that's illegal about that.
Those letters are going out to
Everybody?
Yeah, my daughter got one. She laughed. She said, "It's my house." She hadn't had it for 6 months. And she said, "Really?"
So any other question in the back?
Yeah, so I live in JP. I've my whole life basically, and I've seen a lot of changes obviously. So a friend of mine recently told me about a renter, and the building was sold, and the new landlord said to the renters, the rent is now triple. And so obviously they're forced to leave. And I was talking to someone else, and they were like, but it's really kind of short-sighted to blame the new landlord only, because the long-term owner, who probably bought it for $10,000, $15,000 in the 70s, knew what was going to happen. That person knew that that the renters were going to get screwed, and that their retiring on that building was going to was going to have an adverse effect on the neighborhood and contribute to the ongoing gentrification of neighborhoods all around the city. It doesn't have to be Jamaica Plain. So one thing that I see here is that, when you talk about, it comes down to this choice of, oh, but what about me? What about my family and what I can pass on to my children? That's a legitimate thing, but what about the value of community? I think there's a failure in communicating what it means to actually have a neighborhood where there is long-term residency, and there's a coherent culture, and there's people, and the valuing of the community. And that we have to, I mean, obviously we're speaking the language of capitalism, and we're talking about something much more broad, much more important, but we have to convey that importance to people in order to win this, in order to win community control and cooperative ownership.
Good point, good point.
So I just really want to thank you all for mentioning all those pieces. And
I'd just like to say, Jane Jacobs, who wrote the book Life and Death of American Cities, that was supposed to be telling us about just what you said, neighborhoods and the value of having those kinds of neighborhoods, kind of gave up on it eventually. And the last book that she wrote that I read, which was called Dark Age Ahead, it basically says what the problem is collective amnesia, collective denial of what the reality is, and that's what the whole culture is doing. I mean, somehow somebody has to say these things. I'm going to say the word stealing. What we're talking about here that's going on, it's stealing. You are having stuff stolen from you when these games go on with your property.
One of the things I wanted to say is I think there have been a lot of, for me, pieces of solutions. They're not just, they're pieces, they have to be integrated. It's not just one thing. I think with Suzanne talking about having a citywide organizing, where it's not just about one neighborhood, it's all neighborhoods. I think the piece that you just mentioned around a vision as housing, and not only housing as a human right, but communities. What does it mean to have a community? And doing that kind of organizing with that kind of a focus also. I think the homesteading piece, I think it's multi-pronged. And I think that we have to come together and bring it together and integrate it whole. Have a vision and work on that. It's a long-term vision. It's not going to happen overnight. But if we don't have the vision and come together and work toward that vision, it's not going to happen. It's piecemeal, it's just not going to work.
One of the things.
Somebody over here doing one thing, somebody over here doing something.
One of the things that I'm serving on the board at GS&I, I'm learning so much about property and how they assess things and so forth. And the terms that we use. We had two developers come and talk about what they wanted to do with some of the vacant land. And they said, oh yeah, we're gonna make sure that the housing is affordable. We're only gonna charge $1,000 per bedroom.
Right.
I couldn't help it. I went, what? And then I said, well, you say you're gonna make the housing affordable for the people that live here already, and that you're gonna hire from this neighborhood. What are you gonna pay those people? $15 an hour. So what does affordable mean? How can somebody making $15 an hour be able to stay if they have, even if they don't have children, they only have a one bedroom, be able to pay $1,000 per month? I don't know how people are even living today, honestly. And that's why I guess I get so emotional when I think about how fortunate I am to have gotten my house through GS&I. And I know that's not the only solution, but thank God I got it, And I think everybody needs it. And that's the thing. We need to realize that everybody is deserving, okay? All of us. This country belongs to all of us, not just a handful of people. And we need to make sure that we educate those that come behind us. Because I find that the young people know even less. I can't believe the amount that they don't know about what has gone on. When I ask them about things like, do you know who Fannie Lou Hamer was? And I know that, you know, they separate our history and they say, oh, that's black history. I'm not black, I don't need it. That's American history. So that's what we need to make sure of, that we understand that this is one country and that we need to incorporate all of this. And when I look at, I can't help this, when I look at language, okay, they call people of color minorities. I'm sorry, when I look around the world,
What is that? What is that?
Just a couple of thoughts. One is that when the comment about we need to help people grow in understanding of what community means. That's it. Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean that's a kernel of, that's a foundation to build on. The dilemma though is that from a standpoint of a person of African descent, I have to look at the situation and say, you know, my people have been here for 300 to 400 years. And at the end of those 300 to 400 years, we're still treated as if we're the outcasts by people whose families came 100 years ago. And so the question comes, how can we develop a sense of community? I think struggle is a key element of that understanding. We have to also appreciate that there's going to be another crisis. That is, the banks haven't changed their patterns, and so they're doing the same things they were before, and so there's going to be a crash. The question is, when the next crash comes, doesn't seem like Congress is ready to bail out the banks. And so I think one issue is going to be that there's going to 5-7 years, there's going to be financial chaos in this country because the whole financial structure collapses based on the greed of those who have. The question for us, I think, is how do we lay the foundations now and do the consciousness raising so that as those moments come, we're in a position to say to those who are in elected office, this is what you do. These are the models that can move us forward. But in order to have that work, we have to be doing the work today in terms of building people's consciousness so they're pulling out the system, and as the crash comes, they'll say, oh, that's what she was talking about. The system isn't really going to hold us up. So now let's really sit down and figure out what we can do. But I don't think we can depend upon just a gradual raising of consciousness. We have to think about how do we take advantage of the economic chaos that's going to come even more strongly, especially on those who have finances. When the banks collapse, those who are running in our neighborhoods trying to buy the houses won't be in the same situation. And so I think we have to prepare ourselves for a day when that comes, and we can be prepared with our land trusts, with our cooperatives, with our other strategies of cooperative living, and return to being human beings rather than robots in the system.
So, thank you for the closing. Well, we need to sort of end here. Unfortunately, I mean, there's a lot of things that came out of this conversation. I want to thank everybody, Bob, Susan, Che, and Diane and Chuck for the contribution. As you can see, I mean, there's tons of history, wealth of wisdom here. And I think many lessons to learn. I mean, how we bring all these things together. There's nothing in isolation and there's no fragmented issues. We have how we can be doing things. And I would say thank you for being here today. I think you guys are going to have another workshop after this. But enjoy the day in that way.